Thank you, Count Corla. I'll be putting a number of questions to the Minister, and I'll give him an opportunity to respond here in the House. Before I put those questions to the Minister, I'd like to join with him and colleagues from across the House in recognising the huge work that members of the Defence Forces have done during the COVID-19 crisis, from the establishment of those early testing centres on our naval vessels, to their participation in contact tracing, to, I think, the involvement across counties across the country in the community call. I think we're all incredibly grateful to the steadfast work of members of the Defence Forces and their efforts at this time. And I think it's always worth noting the unique role that the Irish Defence Forces have played, particularly in matters of peacekeeping over 60 years now, and from their involvement in Mediterranean rescue missions in the last number of years, to their participation in UN peacekeeping duties in the DRC, in Lebanon. Ours is a unique defence force, and I think its uniqueness is recognised internationally. It's recognised by the United Nations, and particularly the impartiality that members of the Irish Defence Forces bring in the conflict zones in which they serve is hugely valued. We're also well aware of the challenges that are faced by our Defence Forces, and I think many of these have been raised by deputies here today. The issues with retention and the ongoing recruitment issues due to issues surrounding low pay. Also the fact that members of the Defence Forces can't participate within trade unions, and the issues that creates for them in regards lack of support sometimes in participation in public pay agreements. But Minister, in mid-April, the Department of Foreign Affairs began urging Irish citizens to return home where possible before the strictest of the COVID restrictions, both here in Ireland and abroad, came into place. And it was around the same time that the Irish peacekeeping troops in Lebanon were informed that their rotations was being suspended in order to prevent the spread of COVID. And understandably, this led to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress for members of the Defence Force and their family. Now, it's welcome that you have confirmed that those serving in the Lebanon will be allowed to return to Ireland later this month. However, there is some lack of clarity around a number of issues that you might be able to give some assistance with here today. I suppose, first of all, can you clarify the quarantine requirements for those who are returning, and in particular, what level of contact troops will be able to have with families during the quarantine period, particularly for those who choose to quarantine in a barracks? And secondly, I understand members of the Defence Forces who are being rotated out in Lebanon, they'll be required to complete the full 14-day quarantine. Minister, can you clarify what procedures will be put in place should a member of Defence Forces test positive with COVID-19 during this quarantine period? And finally, for members of the Defence Forces who were due to be deployed overseas and have been delayed because of the extension of the original rotation, there's obviously going to be a consequent delay in receiving the Overseas Peace Support Allowance. And Minister, can you advise if there will be any additional financial supports put in place to mitigate against the loss of income that those members of the Defence Forces and their families will face? Because I think we're all aware that that particular allowance that extra income is extremely important to many members of the Defence Forces and their families. Thank you.
Members coming back from Lebanon have the option of either quarantine in their own home or quarantine in a barracks. That is an option for themselves. But the people deploying out to UNIFIL in Lebanon will go into quarantine. My understanding is, I think it is the week, sometime Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, 2 weeks from departure, and they will be quarantining together. I understand that there are arrangements in place, and the Chief Medical Officer of the Defence Forces are very much involved in preparing and quarantining of personnel going out to UNIFIL. Just my department, as I said earlier, Deputy O'Gorman, is that my department are looking at a full range of issues, financial issues that are affecting members of the Defence Forces in and around allowances, and they are full engagement with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform at this moment in time. As I stated, I want to be able to let members and personnel know what the outcome of those discussions and negotiations are as soon as possible. But I hope you can understand the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform are dealing with a range of other different areas as well. But it will be my intention that as soon as I get that information back from the Department of Public Expenditure, that I can inform the personnel who are very much going out, and people who are going out to UNIFIL, and to give them full clarification on that.